I'm Eric Chemi, and this is Politely Pushy. Jeff Wilser is my guest today here on Politely Pushy. Jeff, thank you so much for joining me. I have to start. You are currently the host of the podcast AI Curious, but it seems like you started it before generative AI took over the entire world. So how were you so much? How did you have so much foresight to see like, okay, AI media is the place to be?
First off, great to be here. Super excited. Second off, you're giving me way too much credit. I cannot claim to be years and years ahead of the curve. Like everyone else, or like many folks, I was fascinated with the possibilities of generative AI. I started playing around with ChatGPT, doing things like asking it weird prompts like, what if Abraham Lincoln somehow discovered an iPhone that had traveled through time, and how would that impact his presidency in a civil war? And write it in the style of Ernest Hemingway and kind of played around with prompts like that. And I was kind of amazed at what it was able to pull off. And that's kind of what got me obsessed with all things AI.
But your background is not necessarily AI, right? When I was researching this podcast, I was expecting, okay, if he's got this AI expertise, maybe he was a developer or AI startup. Nope. And I'm looking at, celebrity types of outlets that you've worked on as a journalist and all kinds of fun, let's say, less technical things. So how did you make the jump
I
to
have
AI?
Zero technical background. Yeah, no developer chops. No, I cannot. I will flunk any serious conversation that gets deep into the weeds here on the tech front. No, great question. I'm a general interest writer and general interest journalist. I've written 8 books that have ranged from firefighters to politics to health trends to business to tech. And I write for magazines ranging from Time Magazine to GQ and so on. And over the years, I have kind of commitment phobia and I switch focus very quickly. So I am constantly going from topic to topic to topic. And in a way, that's what intrigued me about AI, is just how multifaceted the topic is. And this is the first time in my 15-ish year writing career that I kind of forced myself to pause and say, wait a second, slow down. This is a topic worthy of spending serious time on and putting a lot of chips onto the table for. I became fascinated by how, in a way, AI is a general interest topic. It's not just tech. I am enthralled by how it has an impact and it is involved in topics ranging from art and creativity to obviously the economy and the workforce to politics to geopolitical military issues to business and productivity and on and on and on. It's hard to find a topic or a bucket of life that AI is not somehow involved in. And that's one reason why I was so drawn to kind of covering it and following it more closely.
It's funny you mentioned you're afraid of commitment. And I was going to ask, do you mean commitment in like personal life or just work?
That's a whole other podcast right there, Eric.
So I wasn't going to ask that question. But then on your LinkedIn, I go way deep and it says you were the founding editor of The Plunge, the leading website for grooms. Like that's the ultimate commitment type of story. And yet you're telling me you're afraid of commitment. So what was that like running
a very different chapter of my life? But the idea at the time was we wanted someone who was, and let's face it, it was a bit absurd. I was single at the time and overseeing a publication, writing about articles of how to be a groom. So this is me, bachelor in New York, writing about wedding planning and wedding etiquette and decorum. So
have you never been the main?
I had never been a groom. I at the time had no plans to be a groom, yet here I was writing about being a groom. I was doing things with the knots, and I was for a while they're kind of like groom expert at the knot, which was again. So for folks who don't trust who have media. This is exhibit A right here. Wait a second. Why is this journalist writing about grooms who's not a groom? So, our at the time, our thinking was, well, this is good. It gave me kind of an outside perspective, fresh eyes, unbiased, right? Because if you are a groom, then you're shading everything just to kind of like skew towards what you did with your own wedding. I was saying, hey, I'm objective. I'm just a neutral observer, and I can write with dispassion and objectivity.
Is that the approach that you take to AI now? It's like, I wasn't a groom, but I'll write about grooms. I'm not an AI guy, but I'll be an AI outsider and try to talk about it from that point of view.
That's actually a pretty great question. And you're kind of forcing me to be a little introspective here. In some ways, there is, I think the common, all kidding aside, I'm mostly joking around with the plunge stuff, but all kidding aside, the one common thread in all of the work I've done as a journalist, ranging from writing about cryptocurrency to firefighters to being a groom, is I try and take a kind of dense or opaque topic and subjects and make it engaging, right? So on the surface, AI and ice sculptors at your wedding reception have nothing in common. But in a sense, most men, to use a stereotype that I think has at least a bit of truth to it, have not spent a lot of time thinking about what goes into planning a wedding. So there was an art of taking a topic that they know nothing about and trying to demystify it. And I try and bring that same approach to, like, I've written about blockchain, Bitcoin, and crypto a ton over the past 6 years. That can be a very opaque, complicated, in the weeds topic. And I try and use storytelling and focus on humans and interesting, compelling, juicy stories people can relate to and people find compelling. I use that as a way to unpack and get access to trickier topics. So I try and take that same kind of curiosity and openness and willingness to really engage in a subject and use that to cover any topic, whether that is weddings or crypto or AI.
How much is your focus now only on, let's say, AI and crypto versus all the other stuff that you had done in the past? Are you still doing general interest? Or are you all in on technology right now?
No, I definitely am still doing general interest. And I think I'm guessing I will always be doing that. I do have I know it sounds cliche, but it's true. I'm a curious guy, and whatever happens to spark my interest, I might follow that path. So I'm not closing off other types of stories. I still write about travel. I still write about exploration. I most recently finished a book about the Explorers Club, which is the kind of distinguished organization founded in 1904 of the literally greatest explorers in the world, ranging from the folks who originally were trying to find the North Pole, South Pole, then included John Glenn and the Apollo astronauts, and eventually Jane Goodall and leaders in conservation and climate change science. So this book absolutely captivated me. And it was one of the honors of my career to interview titans in the world of exploration and do research going back from the 1880s all the way to today for in NASA scientists. So that has very little to do with AI or tech. And I just ate it up and continue to work with the Explorers Club. So while my large focus is on AI and tech, I am absolutely still trying to embrace that kind of wider general interest, open curiosity, exploration mindset as well.
What is the business model for someone like you, right? So self-employed, freelance, speaking, writing books, doing a podcast. How do you balance it all? And what's the flywheel look like of how one form of content brings in the next form of content?
Yes, 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 and yes. And I found as a self-employed freelancer, I think most freelancers can relate to this. the more you just do only one thing, the riskier that is. I've been very lucky over the years to have great relationships with editors, with book publishers. So for at a high level, the way it works for me is to have large anchor clients and anchor chunks of work, whether that's book writing, or I also do collaboration on books and ghostwriting, having anchor freelance writing contracts. I think that I have tons of friends who are freelancers, and as I'm sure you do too. And when folks try and cobble together a living just from, all right, I'm going to write these articles here and those articles there, and you cobble together these checks. And even for a good, let's speak plainly here, right? Let's say you write in the world of freelance writing, a long form piece for a prestige publication that pays something like 4K, 6K, 8K, which in this world is a lot of money for freelance writing. It requires cobbling together a lot of those to make the math work, to actually make a living. So for me, I've always found that it makes sense to have a mix of articles and then larger projects as well. And it's that overall portfolio, if you will, makes more sense than doing just one thing.
Yeah, I think about that too. Like, let's say you round number 5K you get for one piece. How much work did you put into that piece? And how many of those are you getting in a year? And there's no guarantee you're getting any future work. And how much marketing or self-selling do you have to do to continue to get them, right? That's a tough way to make a living if you're just picking up that piecework one by one without, I see your point, like having those big anchors, maybe bigger projects. I know you've even run the consensus conference, for example, right? You're doing a lot of different kinds of things. It makes me wonder about the future business model for journalists in a world where, like coming from my world, no one's watching cable TV anymore, right? So what's going to happen to all of those people, right? And how do they use their brand to build something for them that is sustainable in the modern world?
Yeah, I think it's a valid concern. I think that, let me back up for a moment. I think that folks are rightly worried about how AI will impact the media landscape, and frankly, how AI will impact every industry. That's a valid, fair question. It's one I'm asking myself. But I think people lose sight of the fact that even before AI, there were grave macro concerns about media to begin with. Like, to be blunt, the media pie has been shrinking long before AI entered the scene, right? Look at the state of local newspapers. Look at magazines, right? We don't look at most websites. We don't have the same media rich soil now we did 20, probably even 10 years ago. And so to your point, Eric, I think even before AI, it is the uphill slope that journalists need to are running up. You could argue that is becoming steeper and steeper and steeper, and likely it's an open question of how AI will impact this, right? Because potentially that gets steeper still. Maybe for those who are leaning into it, AI can be a bit of a tailwind to help you in that battle, to mix metaphors. But it's a tough question. I certainly don't have any solid answers yet. I'm not sure anyone does.
How much AI are you using in your own work? Like, are you using an AI podcast editor, AI for writing, AI for maybe marketing? How much AI tools do you personally use?
Yeah, not a day goes by that I don't use AI in at least some capacity. That's often ChatGPT, but not always. Just to give you a couple of examples, I certainly for the podcast, I use the editing software I use has AI embedded throughout. Shout out to Descript, which I know is becoming more and more popular.
Descript is the one I keep hearing about. That's the one.
It is a reason why it is the buzziest podcast editing system right now. They have gone whole hog, embraced AI in many of their elements, and I use that liberally. Not always. There are some things that, if you're not careful, like for not to get too in the weeds here, but one example I think is illustrative. They have a feature that lets you press a button, and all of the like gaps of silence in a podcast can be cut out. Or they have a feature where all of the ums, likes, you knows are instantly removed. And you can kind of go through and more granularly say, oh, I want to take out the ums, but not the likes, or vice versa. If you're not careful, if you paint too broad of a brush and just say, yes, strip them all out, it goes a little overkill, goes haywire, and sounds unnatural, right? And there's also something to humans like you and I speaking. When I make little slip ups, which is quite common in my case, there's elements of authenticity there, right? And when things seem a little too smooth and polished, it feels less real, and that undercuts what many folks like the podcast to begin with, right? So I think, I know we're getting a little nerdy on this one example, but I think there's a larger takeaway about AI, in that if we're not careful, an overuse of it can kind of strip out some of the human authentic imperfections and can seem a little too kind of shiny and plasticky.
It makes me think about when you were giving the examples here of you saying and like. I was thinking about if you ran that through the filter, would it blank out you saying those words? Right? Your description of what Descript does would
Totally
eliminate
yes.
your saying of it removes the ums and the likes. Would it just say it removes?
And yeah, or it wouldn't be silent. It would kind of compress it all. Say,
right,
it removes this and this and this and this. I'm like, what the hell did he just say?
Right.
And I've done things like that where I've backed off it, but for an episode or two, I was experimenting with this tech, and I overdid it. And like the guests, and I re-listened to it, and there were important moments that the woman was saying about, and I think it was over eager, and I forget the exact example, but it took away some crucial context. I went back and I fixed it, thank goodness. But yes, that's just one example of how AI can go kind of awry. But to answer your original question of what else I'm using it for, I do not use it to write for me anything of imports. Part of that perhaps is professional pride and stubbornness, right? I'm a paid writer, so I think, no, I can do this myself. I don't want you to write for me. I can write better than you, which I think is still true for the moment. That might change. But what I do think I use it for liberally is all kinds of brainstorming as a thought partner. I use it for pre-research or to help with research. Given its fondness for hallucinating, of course, I don't use that as the final research. But let's say I am writing, I'm going to make something up. If I'm writing an article about the best museums in Colombia, maybe I'd ask it to tell me all about museums in Colombia. That is something I can then use, and I would check everything, I'd vet it, find other sources. But it's nice to have a little bit of an easy primer, right? I also think that it can be a great, it's great for helping you find blind spots and weaknesses. So if I have an outline, I might send it to ChatGPT, ask for its thoughts. Hey, what am I missing? What are things I'm not thinking about? If you had to double the length of this, what would you add? Push back on me, right? So I think it's very useful to give you perspectives you haven't thought of. On my podcast, AI Curious, I interviewed, and I've talked to multiple CEOs and thought leaders who do a similar version of this. So I'm just stealing it from them. One person I spoke with who is an entrepreneur, if they're writing a pitch deck, they would say, hey, put yourself in the role of a skeptical investor. Let's say you are a VC who's really a hard nose and asking tough questions. What questions would you ask me? What pushback do you have? So you can use ChatGPT to anticipate kind of the other side and can help strengthen your arguments in advance.
And see, I'm slow there. I'm slow getting back to my question and moving my window around. That's where Descript would have cleaned up that little
That's good. It means it's real. This is a free flowing, real, authentic conversation. This is proof of humanity here. It's good.
I was writing notes down. That's why I was writing notes.
Well, actually, one more thing. I'll buy you some time then. One more thing I use it for a lot. I now, I mean, this is not breaking news, crazy unlock idea no one has thought of before, but just what I do in my day to day. It is now, I usually start a search with AI as opposed to Googling, right? So it generally gives me results in a cleaner, easier to follow format than just bringing up like a 7 Google link.
7 sponsored results, right?
Exactly.
It makes you wonder about that business model though, right? That if we're skipping
100%.
through the ads, can ads infiltrate into the AI answer? Like what's going to happen?
They're going to have to. No, I mean, it is a existential question for the internet. You're spot on. That no one really has an answer here in a sense that like the entire revenue model of the internet is built upon search and ads. And when AI powered search blows that up, when to be very concrete here, if I'm back to my stupid, I don't know why my mind went here, back to my example of the museums in Colombia.
Is that an article that you have worked on or will be working on?
No, I actually intentionally chose something I would it's like a 0.0. Yeah. My mind was trying to find something that was nothing I would do. So I'm not, spilling state secrets here. So back to my museums in Colombia article that I have not written and will not write. In the past, I write this, and let's say it's museum.com, that's publishing my article. And they are hoping that people, when they search best museums in Colombia, that their article written by Jeff Wilser, museums on museums.com, they're hoping that will be in the top 3 or 4 of results. People click on that link. They see the ads, and the ads are for airlines or cruises or hotels or whatever, what have you, right? In the future, instead of people clicking that link, when they Google or when they use Perplexity AI search or ChatGPT and they say, hey, what are the best museums in Colombia? They're able to say, here are the top 10. And there's no need to click on my article, right? And that is again, I don't think it's overwrought or hyperbole to use this phrase existential question for the internet. And as an aside, Google is in a very interesting place here because they're kind of on both sides of this. Google, of course, is developing their own AI meant to compete with OpenAI, but their entire company is kind of predicated on ad revenue from search. So are they
want you to waste time going through one by one all these results?
Yeah. So it'll be fascinating to see how this shakes out.
So when you were giving that previous answer, I was wondering about 4 questions that come up. Number 1, when you started the podcast, audience, who is the idea? What was your idea for who is the audience? If I build it, will they come? Was there a demand for this? Or you just thought, hey, I'm going to just start this and see what happens? But who are you trying to reach?
Yeah, great question. I don't know that and perhaps I should have. I don't think I was quite as explicit, like in a conference room with a whiteboard, kind of carving up demographics and talking about whom, what age and this and that. I was following my gut of thinking, I am personally very curious about what AI is beginning to mean to the world and how it will evolve and where this will all go across a multitude of dimensions, right? Ranging from business to philosophy. Like I've had on like neuroscientists to talk about how will we know if AI becomes sentient? Like, what are the tests, right? That's one episode I've had. Then I had an episode with Hollywood producers on how AI is impacting the movie industry in ways good and bad, challenging, promising, terrifying, exciting, all that stuff, right? Then an episode with a lawyer on the legal impacts. Point is, in getting back to your question, I had confidence in my own curiosity of all of this. So my leap of faith is that others would too. There must be others like me that frankly don't want to go crazy deep in the tech, right? I'm not gonna have like a 2-hour episode getting into like inference and the kind of like the deep machinations. What's that? Sorry.
I was going to say like the examples of how you're tweaking, your inference model and how many layers are in your neural network and
Right.
what's your weighting and zero weights and like how crazy do we want to get with this stuff, right?
Exactly. Maybe someday, but for
Yeah.
now, we'll leave the weighting questions to different podcasts. And so my target audience really like folks like me that recognize it's important, but don't want to spend too, and obviously I am spending more time on it. I need to develop the content. Of course, I am personally now spending a lot more time in AI lands, but I view my role as helping curate interesting stories and themes and topics that I think that someone who is such a general interest person like me, they're reading the news, right? These are like New York Times readers. They are savvy, staying up on current news, current affairs. They get the AI's importance. They want to know a bit more without like devoting crazy time to it. I try. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So I thought you were done. See, I need the script to tell me when the pause is done. I'm just going to say, do you outsource any of the editing or the booking or the production, or are you doing everything here?
As of now, I am doing it all. I obviously that will, hopefully / likely change in the future. But and part of actually just to peel back the curtain a little bit here, which I think is a big part of your podcast is great. It's fun. It's fun to, and I'm guessing, Eric, you can relate to this as of learning new skills. I think that for journalists, a lot of the time we're doing the same thing again and again and again. And writers are doing the same thing. Now, there's always new things you're writing about. There's always new topics and personalities, and that keeps things fresh and invigorating, sure. But it's rare you're learning like a new skill. And there's something just purely pleasurable about learning things like, oh, I need to learn audio editing. I need to figure out the basic mechanics of this, which platform to use, what are the shortcuts. That's just it's especially I think a larger theme of mine in life is I think it's rare that people pick up new skills and interests as they get older. One pet theory of mine is we tend to like peak of our interests breadth, let's say in college. And after that, what begins is a very broad range of interests in things we do, things we are investigating and learning and practicing, whether that's a musical instruments or picking up a new sport like tennis or photography, whatever it is. We start broad. And as our career develops, as we get more focused on relationships or family, those interests tend to narrow and hopefully deepen, but narrow. And so when I can, and I wish I was better at this than I am, but I like taking the opportunity to go broad again, to do new things that I don't need to do, but that enriches my life in surprising ways.
When you're booking, what's the process for how you find guests and what makes for a good guest on your show?
Great question. I found that the best episodes and guests, and I'm not going to name names in either direction, are the ones that, again, going back to the thesis of the podcast, AI Curious, I am either truly insanely curious about this particular person or this topic. So I'll do one of two things. There are times when I see some AI notable person, whether on Twitter/X or whatever, somehow in the news. I'm like, okay, I need to talk to them. So I'll give one example of this. There was, you probably saw it a month or two ago, these two Harvard kids Harvard students who created this wacky and wild and frankly deeply disturbing tech device by they hacked together Ray-Ban smart glasses, the kind that have like a camera on it, and then used a reverse facial recognition software, and then used AI to allow them in near real time, not quite, but near real time, as they're walking down the streets, almost like literally Black Mirror style. They can like walk, they saw a guy in the subway, and within a minute they realized, okay, that is Joe Schmuckatelli who lives at this address, who does this. And they could tell Joe Schmuckatelli, oh, aren't you Joe Schmuckatelli who lives at, 214 Main Street? And it was wild. And that story went viral. It was on the front page of the New York Times. And so when that was forwarded to me by some friends, I was like, okay, I need to talk to these guys. And so I invited them on the podcast. And also I want to say as a PSA for these two Harvard students, and they've kind of gotten a bad rap. And as one describes on my podcast, they did not do this to create some dystopian monster. He knew full well this raised all kinds of privacy concerns. And he, in fact, the whole purpose of the experiment was to raise those questions. They wanted to get this out there so humanity realized, holy shit, this kind of chilling technology is not something that will scare us in the future. It's already here today. So we should figure out guardrails. Anyways, a long-winded way of saying, sometimes I will find the person and like, okay, I want them on the show. That'd be a great conversation. Other times I'll back into that through a topic. I'm like, oh, I really want to do an episode on AI and the movies. Who is a good guest for that? And so I'll kind of back into it by focusing on topic. But ultimately, in either direction, I am generally following my own curiosity, whether that's topic or person.
I see. I remember that story. That was crazy. I read a lot about that, the facial recognition and what you could do with it, because I do think they're just showing that it's possible, right? Hey, if two college kids can whip this up so quickly, imagine what's possible when giant governments, giant trillion-dollar organizations want to put an army of tech workers behind this. What else could they do?
Eric, it took them 4 days. Right. 4 days to do this.
Two college kids, 4 days. Like yes. What is possible then with here? There's $1 billion budget. Go do what you want to do.
I don't think it's weird. As much hype as there has been around AI, and there's been a ton, and in a way, I'm guilty of feeding into it. I've fed the hype beast myself. As much hype as there is, I still weirdly at the same time think there's almost an underappreciation of how much the world can and likely will change with new AI advancements. And that's one reason why I wanted to do this podcast, is to kind of get ahead of it. I don't have any illusions that I am really part of the solution. I'm not going to pretend to have these like altruistic motives of, oh, I'm going to help us like really figure out how to, handle AI. I don't have any illusions there. But I do think it's important, at the very least, to be aware of what's coming down the pike to help us, if nothing else, emotionally brace for it and kind of steel ourselves for it.
When do you think you'll run out of steam on it? When do you think you'll move on? As you've moved on with your other interests and you've sort of got to this point of, okay, I know enough about this. I'm curious about the next thing. How long do you think AI Curious has legs? How many more years before you think, okay, honestly, I'm going to do something else?
Yeah, great question. Honestly, I feel like I am just getting started. That question hasn't even, you're the first person to ask that, like including myself. I've just passed the year mark recently, and I have been religiously cranking out episodes every Thursday a new long form interview, I pump out. I think last Thanksgiving, I think I released that on Friday, not Thursday. That was my one exception. Other than that, I've just been cranking these out. I love doing it. There has not been a moment I've thought about, oh, is it time to, I'll just tease by saying I have pretty exciting plans on leaning further into it, on scaling up, on doing more. So if there's ever a moment where I become restless, the answer in my mind, at least right now going forward, is to be doing more, not less. I am truly enthralled by this topic in ways I have not been in prior projects of mine in my journalism career.
So you like this better than talking about nightclubs or rooms and weddings? You feel like this is a little bit.
Actually, I do. I want to clarify one thing for a moment. This is not to say there are no other projects I have not loved as much, and to be, many of the books I've written, I'm very proud of, and I've loved doing. So it's not to say I like A more than B, this more than that. But as far as what has legs to continue to invest my time and energy in, both from a intellectual pursuit, but also business model, this makes sense in ways other topics have not, that I've also enjoyed. Like, for instance, working with the Explorers Club is an absolute peak honor of my career. I continue to work with them. I think I'm allowed to say there's a second book that I am working on with them. I am extremely fired up for that, and am very excited about continuing that exploration. So there are other projects that I love and will keep doing, but the unique aspect of AI, of how it touches on so many different kind of parts of the world. And then also, I think by jumping into it on a relatively early time frame, gives me a position to continue to grow and tell stories and help others connect with AI. So I will definitely keep leaning into it for the foreseeable future.
I love it, Jeff. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing some of your insights today, and then the process for how you're doing all the things that you're doing. It's amazing to see. So we're gonna have to look for that, whatever is coming with the new stuff as you continue to grow and build it out. Thanks so much, Jeff.
Thanks so much. Really enjoyed.
Thank you to my guest, and thanks for listening. Subscribe to get the latest episodes each week, and we'll see you next time.